Hi, Rosie here. And I thought this time I would talk a little bit about language and the importance of the language that we use when we're talking about our designs and when we're listening to other people who are giving us a reading, for example, about our design. And I remember from the very beginning when I started learning about human design that I was kind of struck by the language. First of all, I found it kind of mechanical and weird and, like vehicle and I don't know, strategy, authority. It was kind of very masculine. It wasn't very warm or juicy or anything. And it didn't matter. I was still completely intrigued by this whole world and I just couldn't help but dive in. But there was something about the language that felt a little bit cold and a little bit negative. Like the deeper I got in, the more it felt like, oh, that's kind of a really negative spin on this particular gate or this particular channel, for example. And so I came to kind of learn that part of that is because human design came through this incredible man, whose name is Ra. I just want to make sure my recording was working. Whose name is Ra Uru Hu, who from 1987 on basically dedicated his life and so much passion and courage and intelligence to bringing the system into the world. And now it's like this incredible education, multi-dimensional education. So, I mean, gotta love Ra. And Ra was an ego manifester. He was not here to please anybody. He liked to call himself a depressed Buddhist. And I think some of the languaging that ended up kind of, couching the human design system was coming through this man, through Ra. And not just that, not just his own personality, like his own filter it was coming through, but also his experience of what is probably true, that most human beings on the planet are not being true to themselves. They have no clue about who they are. They're living out a conditioning pressure that they got from the day they were born, and it's leading to all kinds of horrible things. People are conditioned to fight and to think of themselves as separate from others and to protect their own and not to see oneness and to do all kinds of really crazy things and to pressure each other into being things that we're not. There's a lot of not self behavior, tragic things going on this planet. And so clearly a lot of the language in human design is kind of reflective of that. And this is where I was so happy when I became more familiar with Richard Rudd's work within the human design world, and also with the work that he did as he began to evolve as a human design person, but a mystic in his own right, poet. And so the more I got into the gene keys, which basically doesn't just look at who we are from a two-dimensional shadow perspective, what it looks like, what we might look like when we're not living as ourselves. But he kind of suddenly gave it all these dimensions so that we're looking at a whole spectrum of experience, a whole spectrum of expressiveness when we're looking at somebody's design, right? So we're not just looking at the way it shows up as a shadow, but the way that it shows up as a gift, and the way that it shows up as an essence, as a spiritual essence that is kind of a form of oneness, right? So suddenly this kind of two-dimensional body graph became three-dimensional, four-dimensional, five-dimensional. And there was all of this beautiful language used to describe the potential of any given aspect of a design, whether it's type or strategy or a stream. This is like a stream of consciousness as opposed to like a circuitry, right? Whatever it was, the languaging became much more beautiful. And it didn't mean that we weren't also looking at the shadows. There's a huge part of the Gene Keys work in integral human design where we're really looking at the shadow. How does our potential play out when we're coming from a place of fear, when we're contracting, when we're not recognizing our connectedness, and we're seeing the other as separate from us? How does that play out in our lives? That's not self. But if we can lean into that, if we can embrace the fear, feel the fear, not push away the contraction, not be reactive or repress, then what happens? Then this incredible gift kind of rises up and out of the compost of our shadows, and this gift arises, and these incredible things become possible, right? And then not just our gifts, that we can actually make a wonderful contribution in the world, but then we actually begin to experience oneness through various states of consciousness, whether it's bliss or light or I don't know, luminescence or whatever. There are all kinds of words. I really recommend that you get the Gene Keys book if you haven't done that yet, because it's just a total journey. And the language is amazing. It is poetic. It is beautiful. It is empowering. And there's all this science that we're learning these days. And I'm not a scientist, so I'm sure there are people who can speak much more eloquently about this than I can. But it matters what we're told, what we hear about ourselves. When we receive a reading from somebody, it matters how we're described, how our potential is described. If you get a reading from someone and they're just basically mirroring back to you your shadow, what you're likely to look like when you're either repressing or reacting, what you're likely to look like when you're just kind of taking in conditioning and living that out in a really unconscious way, you're only going to get like this much of what your design really is. You're just like this amazing being. And so I guess I want you to get that. Like, I want you to, suddenly I'm hearing Ra in my head saying, yes, Rosie, but you have that open solar plexus that doesn't want to ruffle anyone's feathers and could very easily couch things in very positive words instead of just telling it like it is. Sometimes people need to be shocked. Sometimes people need to hear the truth. And I agree with that. I think that's really true. And I do think that the truth is multidimensional. And the shadow is just one part of that truth. And some people who only live in the light, they need to visit the shadow. But some people who are always going to the hardest place and are always focusing on what needs improvement and where they're not right and where they're not doing it right, they need to hear the rest too, So language is so important, and it impacts how we receive the information, how deeply the transmission goes, and how much of our true potential we ultimately are empowered to experience and express. Okay, so I guess that's a request that I have for you, that if you're interested in getting a reading or doing some more long-term work with someone who works with human design, pay attention to the language they use and how that language impacts you. Everyone is different, right? You might be someone who appreciates the language of tough love. And you might be someone who is so sensitive and already so hard on yourself that you need someone who's able to frame things in a way that gives you hope, that makes you appreciate all that you are and gives you the courage that it takes to actually lean into and embrace and be with the shadow aspects of your life and your being. Okay? So, so that's my invitation to you. Be aware of the language and its impact on you, and be gentle with yourself. There are many, many ways to be confronted. I had a teacher, I don't know if this is from the Course of Miracles or something. I used to do rebirthing many, many years ago. And what did she say? She said, the biggest confrontation of all is love. It's love. It's love that brings up everything unlike itself in order to be healed. So to receive a reading that's full of love, believe me, that's not escaping. That's not for sissies. It takes a lot of courage to receive love and to be seen for all that you are, for all that you're capable of. Okay.